I feel extremely guilty. As many of you know, I did my first 100 player event the other week, and depending on who you ask, the answer on how well the event went will vary. This is because it went, well, not so great. I thought I'd be starting off this video saying that 5 islands with unique resources try and survive and trade with each other in order to have the best island. That dream just didn't happen, and it's partially because of the inherent flaws of simulations and 100 player events. But in order to understand that, I have to start with my inspiration for my event. There is a content creator called Harvest who makes Project Zomboid 100 player simulation videos. His videos are great, I really enjoy them. However, his last video, as of the time of recording, got ruined by one player just PvPing for no reason. You see, when you do a simulation video, you have to trust that your players will have reasons for fighting. The player in Harvest's event did not have a good reason for storytelling. You could say, oh, it's for survival, but that makes for a boring as balls story. And this is backed by the unusual like to dislike ratio and the increase of hypocritical comments on his video. So I decided to try and fix that for my event. I heavily advertised my 100 player event as a mostly PvE event. However, I said that if RP is done correctly, you may do PvP, especially after the first day. I allowed PvP RP since that is what makes these simulation videos so great, but little did I know that I was about to fall into a different, yet parallel, trap as Harvest. It is now time to finally explain the event. There are 5 islands with about 20 players on each, and their goal is to use their unique resources on their island to make the best island. First up, we had the Plains Island. The Plains Island had the most abundant resources, having a large variety of wood, naturally spawning crops, and really no huge difficulties to overcome. The exception to that, however, is that they had no unique resources. Everything they had, at least one other island could get. Second up, we had the Desert Island. These guys were the opposite of the Plains biome, having no food or trees available to them, so they would have to come up with unique solutions in order to not starve to death, or more importantly, to not fall behind to the other islands. Third was the Snow Island. They had the challenge of living on a giant mountain with deadly powdered snow. This is both a blessing and a curse, since once they did establish a base on the mountain, they had the most defendable island out of them all. Second to last is the most interesting island of them all, being the Nether Island. For this event, you could not go to the Nether, and therefore the only Nether resources were on the Nether Island, and the Nether inhabitants had full control over it, which included the one and only Netherite smithing upgrade template. The problem is that they still are in the Nether and easily live in the harshest environment with very little normal resources. We are going to talk a lot about this island, just you wait. And finally, we have the Windswept Island, being a combination of both the jungle and windswept biome. The unique quality of this island was to see what happens when you let a pre-made group of people crash land together. Every other island pretty much had random people put together on it, but the Windswept Island was a group of friends who had a plan ready for what they were going to do before the event even started. Now that we know the islands, here's the general outline of what's going to be going on. For the first 24 hours, they would simulate surviving on their island with no contact to the outside world, basically being forced to use what they had on their island. The next 24 hours, the islands would be allowed to interact with each other and do trades. And then for the final 24 hours, hardcore would get turned on. And now you may be asking why hardcore wasn't turned on from the beginning, and well, it is simply because I am a smaller content creator without the audience for this type of video. If you want to participate in these events, join my Discord and you may be part of one of my videos. Now that the subtle plug is out of the way, the real reason that hardcore wasn't turned on was simply because I had a feeling that people would just get eliminated too quickly, since this was my first time doing this and the server was not properly prepared for the amount of people. And on top of that, I had the wishful thinking that Bedrock crossplay was going to be a good idea. It really wasn't, but overall it ended up being a fine idea, especially because it got me to that magical 100 player number which I was trying to hit. However, Bedrock players kept lagging out and dying from this. Therefore, me not turning on hardcore for this event in particular was an absolute W of an idea that made the experience far better. I did add a death counter to track which island was the deadliest though. Maybe one day we'll have enough hardcore Minecraft players that we can do one of these hardcore events. Anyways, moving on, the event started off pretty smoothly, honestly. As long as we ignore the lag issues, nothing really went wrong. Every island was working together, and I was collecting data on what people did to survive. The Plains Island, as I suspected, had zero issues at all getting full diamond, and they were doing great. The desert surprisingly actually got trees within the first 30 minutes of the event starting, which, whoops. They did this by finding moss from a shipwreck, then bone mealing it to eventually get azalea trees. I also noticed that they had potatoes, which I heard they got from a zombie already. So much for the challenge of the desert. Checking in with the snow biome, they had set up on top of the giant mountain surviving off of sweet berries. I also just so happened to show off the igloo on my stream on accident, which, by the way, you should follow me there too. And since stream sniping was allowed, one of their members bolted over there. On every island, there was at least one structure except for the plains biome, since we decided to ban villages since this simulation was supposed to only be abandoned islands. With that being said though, igloos typically have a villager and a zombie villager. So since the islands are abandoned and are supposed to have 0 humans on it, the igloo was just a little bit different from default.
I think our top priority first is just getting the diamond tools out so everyone has diamond tools. And then we go for enchantments once we have like
This
the basic
guy-
gear. So
This guy is traumatized.
Looter already.
Hey, let me check.
What
if
did the
he's in
village?
VC.
No, come to.
Oh, he taught.
The
Yeah,
village-
he's in VC. He just was
Yeah,
shell
the village-
shocked. I've been waiting all server for someone to find
happened?
this. The Nether was unsurprisingly keen on taking over the Nether fortress. They were fortifying the blaze spawner and already had a Nether wart farm. With that being said, however, the members of the Nether were dying from the elements more than other islands. This was because of a clear food shortage and the near complete lack of security from piglins and ghasts. This doesn't amount to much in the short term, but we will get back to this point later. Finally, the windswept islands seemed to have slow progress, where they were mostly just gathering resources to defend their island alongside a couple of food farms. They were also the team most affected by the bedrock players being super laggy, so they won't make much obvious progress in the first 24 hours, but just wait and see their island at the end. It's really cool. Overall, this is a great start to an intriguing event. I got to see how fast each island grew and what challenges they had to overcome. But to make things a little bit more interesting, there was actually one part of the event I haven't told you guys yet. After the event has gone on for 2 hours, I would allow each island to send one trader to one other island. They could bring whatever resources they had and take home whatever resources they were given. Here is how that played out. The plains biome decided to trade with the desert biome to build relationships. The desert was struggling with basic resources, and since plains is the island with the most basic resources, the plains leader thought it'd be best to help them to make a strong alliance with them. The snow biome also actually went to the desert for basically the same reason. The snow trader didn't really bring that much and had to get a little bit creative, mentioning they were planning on building an ice boat path, and they ended up trading some wood for some sand and bone meal, but this was mostly for improving trade relations. Speaking of desert, Desert sent their leader to the Nether biome. The desert leader didn't take much to the Nether, which resulted in a small trade of some sand for some blaze rods and nether warts, but still good for relationships. Moving on to the windswept biome, for whatever reason, they actually didn't send out a trader. They had the opposite approach of the plains biome, where the windswept leader mentioned that they didn't really need any unique resources. So they didn't want to make trades since it would only make the other islands stronger. And finally, the Nether leader decided to trade with the plains biome. The Nether was greatly lacking in basic resources just like the desert, so the Nether decided to go trade with them for the basic resources. The only issue with that plan is that the Nether ended up getting the short end of the bargain. When the Nether leader returned home, the supplies they got seemed to barely impact the not-so-pleasant state they were in. On the other hand, the plains biome got blaze rods, nether warts, and other items from the Nether. Now, the Nether could for sure recover their status as a unique resource hub, since they actually had a plan to hoard all the soul sand on the island and protect the blaze and wither skeleton spawner, but this lack of improvement on the Nether island didn't go unnoticed by one of its members. And this is where things start falling apart, not only for the Nether biome, but for the fun of the event. Day 2 starts off with a Discord ping about 30 minutes before the island walls drop, asking for permission to do something that would otherwise be considered griefing. Earlier I mentioned that I would allow PvP for RP reasons. However, I didn't go deeper than that in the rules, since I didn't want to extremely influence this simulation. If I did, it wouldn't be much of a simulation. Though, now that I'm thinking about it, The fact that there are restrictions on what you can do already sort of ruins the simulation a bit. I did mention in my rules that you could message an admin to make sure something makes sense within the simulation, but that rule alone curates the experiment even if no one does it. Just having the rule there changes how people play, which of course was the goal of this rule. We don't want someone with an axe just murdering people randomly, but if we put restrictions on people, that also scuffs the simulation and muddies what people can do. This is, in my opinion, one of the many inherent flaws of basically every single simulation video. You just can't simulate real life in Minecraft easily. You can make the video super entertaining by having Minecraft players go to war or some other thing. Those videos are great, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't inherently make it a good simulation from a strictly simulation point of view. A player can go into these experiments with a predisposed notion that they are going to get full diamond armor, then just start eliminating any player from the event. You can try banning this, but I would argue that there is no natural way of banning it, since you just will have to monitor every single PvP interaction. It also feels like 90% of PvP in these events will end with someone dying. There's no restraining feature to stop someone from swinging. When you get injured, you heal almost instantly. One of the only ways is to just trust that the people will act realistic. And with so many people in the event, that just won't happen. Case in point is what happened on day 2. On day 2 of the event, a player named Archwell planned on doing a takeover of the Nether. This was because the current leader was not properly defending his people, and since the trades they didn't favor the Nether. From a roleplay point of view, this is absolutely amazing. Now, a normal person would probably just talk to the leader and ask him to do better, or would just ask if they could take over. But since it's a Minecraft event, they decided to spice things up and tried to blackmail the leader by threatening to spawn a wither. I think you can see where this is going. What I thought was going to happen was that they would either talk it out or something like that, but what actually happened is it's probably what you would have expected. They started fighting during the conversation. Now remember that in real life, you are directly standing in front of someone. It is a lot easier to talk to them without fighting them. But in Minecraft, PvP is so volatile that you can't just let your guard down. I personally don't want to show clips from this part of the event, since I feel like it is really my fault for not stepping in earlier to make this interaction go better, also because the stream audio was kind of scuffed. So I will just explain what happened. Archwell threatens to spawn a wither unless he becomes leader. Nether leader Plormp tries to break the soul sand from the wither, and in that time Archwell hits Plormp to stop him, which inevitably leads to them starting a loop of fighting and arguing until the wither gets spawned. This then puts everyone into chaos until eventually Plormp disconnects permanently from the event, and every other Nether member starts to relocate to another island. Meanwhile, the in-game chat is just people arguing with each other, and the arguments start leaving the in-game event and go to Discord. This is not at all what you want in your event. The conflict on paper looks fine. Someone does a hostile take over the Nether fortress. This especially worked because there wasn't any PvP at first. However, the conflict escalated to at some point being personal, with personal insults flying around. I mentioned a minute ago that leader Plormp permanently disconnected at some point. This was because he was the direct target of this attack, since he was the leader. Now, even though this was RP, I think the insults got too far and was the biggest regret of the entire server from my end. I messaged them on Discord a little after the event to check in with them, but unfortunately they never responded, and I feel too guilty to try and message them more. As I mentioned, behavior like this makes for a good RP story to set up conflict, but you also have to remember that there is another person on the other side of that screen. So Plormp, if you're somehow watching this, I am super sorry with how you were treated, and this has been bothering me ever since. Going back to Harvest's video, I mentioned that one person was rampaging his server. I had a different yet similar issue. I mentioned that this is great RP. The downfall of the Nether Island was permanently integrated into the lore of the server, and Archwell would take over the Nether Fortress with a teammate Lucille from the Plains Island. This set up for a great comeback story. However, I also mentioned that people were taking insults out of the game. This is just another inherent flaw of these simulations. Not necessarily that they can communicate outside of the game, even though that does affect stuff, but more that there are 100 unique people with different expectations for the server. A majority of the people in the event still think that Archer will just grief the server for no reason. He was rage baiting in-game to act like the villain of the server, which makes things interesting even though we did have to turn it down. But a majority of people had the notion that this stuff was bannable, and that is just completely my fault. Remember that I had rules that said this is basically a PvE event with the ability to do RP PvP. And here's the crucial oversight that I missed with this this event. If there is someone who doesn't want to do roleplay PvP, how are they supposed to act when someone else is trying to do roleplay, which could result in PvP with them? This was most likely the scenario that Nether leader Plormf was in. They had the notion that Archul was griefing, meanwhile Archul was trying to be aggressive for server lore reasons. This is made worse by the insults and rage bait thrown around, which I did eventually try to stop, but I was too late with my decision making, and at this point it was no longer RP. I actually even mentioned in my rules that I would try and stop this type of communication from happening, but I unfortunately failed on that promise. So with everything that happened, I knew something had to change. I was bouncing around on if I needed to just let things play it out for the video, or if I needed to step in. Eventually, I was in the Windswept Islands voice channel, and the Windswept leader Parsifal gave me an idea. It was to ban PvP except for on the Nether Island. This would allow people to still do PvP if they wanted, but since most didn't, the new goal of the server was just to make the best and most profitable island. Now you may say this defeats the entire goddamn purpose of the simulation, and you know what? I agree. This simulation, from a simulation standpoint, is a failure. A complete, utter failure. I could have let it keep going, but honestly, I said something during the events that I still completely agree with. I would rather have my friends than a video. So this simulation was no longer about simulating survival on different biomed islands. It instead turned into one of the best and most fun community events I have ever hosted. Of course, it left a bad taste in some people's mouths, but watching you guys build your amazing structures and interacting with you all is all I needed from this first event. I need to find a middle ground between making a good event and making sure everyone has fun, but that is just the learning curve of doing these events. However, there was still around 46 hours left on the event, so we gathered a bunch of the players to work together to make what was eventually called Peace Island, with a player named Uboy as the leader. During this time, Archul changed his plan to make an obsidian base in order to let people eventually hunt him down to kill him and to get the netherite smithing template. Note that I also made the PvP zone to allow the story to continue in the nether, so that is where he was going to do it at. But Lucille, who was the Plains Island member helping him, started feeling guilty about everything, and after they went to the end to mine the obsidian pillars, this happened.
He's gonna glaze. He's gonna be like, I
that
was
goes hard. Let me spectate him real quick.
Oh,
He's on!
There's no way.
Let's all spam.
He
L.
lost his
Okay,
gear!
everybody.
Yes! He lost his gear! He lost his gear!
Yo.
Yes!
The best.
No way!
Let's go.
Oh my gosh! What?
We beat him!
Obviously, this isn't a great ending to the lore of the server, but I don't think anyone cared at this point. Everyone was just happy that they got their revenge, and I'm currently working on setting up for my next event and refining things to make it a great experience for everyone. So feel free to join my Discord if you want to help out or be a part of the events. Now, the voice you're hearing right now is Editor Me at the end of the video. I actually didn't record an outro for this video because I didn't know what to end on. To reiterate, my main problem with the civilization and simulation videos are that most of them are curated, and if you let people just do what they want, they're not going to act realistic like they do in real life. They're just gonna kill each other, or maybe they'll play too much into the PvE side and then not make an entertaining video. I do very much think that I think my event was a failure simply because most people thought it was a PvE like SMP kind of thing, when the rules did allow the stuff that did happen in this video. The issue then comes from how they reacted to it, because they started yelling at each other, blah, 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 mentioning stuff out of the game, and that just doesn't cause a good simulation. So even though I could have just ignored all this, ignored my viewers, and just let it play on, I just decided that that isn't very responsible of me and just accepted that my first event is going to mostly be a failure. In the future, I'll make sure not to do this middle ground where it's like it's PvE, but it's not, but I don't know. We'll see how it goes. So as I mentioned earlier, feel free to join the Discord to help me out. And I'm thinking about trying a few PvE events because I have a few ideas. I just want to try them. So like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I do want to do more Minecraft content, not just 100 player events, but I would like to do more of them. And thank you all for watching. I will see you all later.